My name is Bethany Schneider. We haven't met before, but I'm going to be asking you some questions about some of the things that you talked about with Mr. Clark on the direct examination, okay?
Okay.
All right. Now, I think you touched on these things during your direct examination, but I want to just make sure that they're clear for the jury, okay?
Okay.
I think there are a few things that we can actually agree on in this case, all right?
Okay.
One of them is that PFT is required to diagnose COPD, correct?
The PFT is part of the assessment to diagnose COPD, that's correct.
And it's actually required by GOLD and ATS, right?
Yes.
Now, by those same criteria, GOLD and ATS, which I think you talked about on your direct examination, an FEV1 over FVC ratio less than 70% is what is required by those criteria for obstruction, right?
Yes, assuming that the test is performed correctly.
Right, but that is the number, that is the threshold number that those require in order to prove a diagnosis of COPD, correct?
From the standpoint of the FEV1 to FVC ratio component of the pulmonary function test, which is one component, yes, that's correct.
Okay. The third point I think we can agree on is that Mrs. Vitale, at least according to the records that we have, did not undergo a PFT between May 5th, 1990 and November 21st, 1996, correct?
That's right.
Now, you talked about we do have some PFTs for Mrs. Vitale, correct?
We have spirometries and one full set of PFTs, that's correct.
And by the raw numbers, the PFT data, none of those meet obstruction according to GOLD and ATS criteria, correct?
That's correct, with the caveat that none of them were done correctly by the ATS criteria as well.
Okay, but just looking at the raw numbers, none of them meet GOLD or ATS criteria for COPD, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the fifth point I think we can agree on, and Dr. Kress, I think you said this a number of times during your direct examination, but Mrs. Vitale had restrictive lung disease, right? I think you said nobody's debating that.
I agree with that, yes. We don't know why, but we know that that physiologic derangement existed. I think that's correct.
All right, so now I'm going to take a step back and talk about some of the things that you looked at when you were reviewing this case, okay?
Okay.
You never met Mrs. Vitale, correct?
That's right.
You never treated Mrs. Vitale.
That's correct.
You had no involvement with her medical treatment at all, right?
Right.
Your role here, I think you explained, is an expert witness for trial, correct?
That's right.
And on direct, I think you talked about how you work at the University of Chicago, right?
Yes.
And so you flew down here from Chicago, I guess yesterday, to testify in the case.
That's right.
You're not licensed to practice medicine here in Florida, correct?
That's right. I'm not licensed to practice in Florida.
You never treated patients here in Florida.
That's correct.
You never had hospital privileges in Florida.
That's right.
And this is not the first time you've flown down here to Florida to testify in a case, right?
I think that's right, yes.
You've testified in another one of these tobacco cases here in Florida, correct?
That's right.
And that one was also for Mr. Clark and Mr. Bigger.